Welcome to the Monday night edition of the People Show with Mark Wallace and Charles Thomas. On this cold and frigid day, we got a great program lined up for you today, as we are 29 days away from what I would call the first leg of the election, because nobody's going to win it flat out. So I'll call it a unofficial primary.
The unofficial primary for Chicago mayor. 9 candidates still vying for the top job, the 5th floor of City Hall. Interesting surveys, polls that are going around. I, quite frankly, do not accept any of them. This is going to be an election that's going to be won, as all elections are, at the actual ballot box. I think there's a lot of feinting and in this with polls, and I think polls, each candidate has his or her own poll, and I think there's a lot of deception going on right now, because I know how polls can be used. I know how they're done, and how they're done can benefit a particular candidate, particularly the candidate who sponsors and pays for the poll. And so I don't put any stock in them at all.
I don't put a lot of stock in polls at all, but I think it just kind of gives you a kind of an idea of where the election is, not who, in a definitive way, right? It just kind of gives you a little insight, to the landscape of where it is. I think, interestingly enough, though, I think that the polls that I pay more attention to are like Crane, Chicago.
Yeah. Let me tell you something about those polls. The media has been decentralized over the past several years, past couple of decades, actually. Much smaller media outlets are prominent now, and the big ones do not have the financial wherewithal to really sponsor polls. There used to be a time when the Chicago Tribune could do a poll and they would spend $40,000, $50,000 on it and really give you a good sample of what the public was thinking. But now they don't have that kind of money to throw around. And a lot of the smaller media outlets don't have it either. So you don't get that big poll. I noticed that even during the election on November 8th, the media polls, the newspapers in Chicago did not do polls on the Sunday before the election. And that's sort of that was always something that happened. They also don't do very large samples anymore, because they simply don't have the money, because they don't have the revenue, because they don't have the subscribers or the viewers anymore in those huge numbers.
And there are many different other outlets. People don't have, 30, 40 years ago, when people only had landlines, they only communicated that way. So the polls were able to reach more people through that way. So it was much more targeted. And right now, there are people who they get their information from many different outlets. People communicate through different outlets that the pollsters can't reach, or don't have the wherewithal, meaning the manpower or the money, to be able to have a real comprehensive poll that gave you a much more, accurate picture of where elections are.
And polls are tailored. They are tailored to a particular candidate. And they don't ask you the first, like there might be 10 questions in a poll. The first question is never, who do you want for mayor? It softens you up until that 6th or 7th question when they ask you, who do you support for mayor? But that's after they've asked you other questions about crime that are loaded. They ask you a loaded question about crime. Do you think Chicago is safe anymore? Right. And you say no. Well, are you afraid when you go out to your garage? And you say yes. And then, do you think the city hall is doing a good job on fighting crime? And you say no. Then they ask you, who do you want for your mayor? It's not going to be the person who's in City Hall because you already said
Right.
that you didn't like what was going on. So, and they know that. They know not to ask that question first.
But I think it is interesting that this is the first election, local election, that I have been called by the candidate.
By the candidate.
By the candidate.
The candidate. Well,
The
that
candidate,
doesn't happen for 99% of the public.
Yeah, I've been called. I got this week 3 calls from Lori Lightfoot
herself.
Her, well, her people.
Oh, her people. Okay. Well, I thought maybe they were calling you individually. I didn't know that.
All right.
Yeah, but we've talked about that because you have talked to individual candidates.
Right. I've had that conversation, but I'm meaning from the campaign itself.
That's clear.
Right. But I've never been called before this election by a campaign themselves. I've been pollstered more in the last 5 or 6 years, because before I would say I've never been polled. So these polls that were out, I was like, I've never gotten a pollster, but the last probably 2 election cycles, I've been called on several times. And again, technology has advanced to where they now have the ability to target zip codes or districts where they have the phone numbers of the number of residents and the telephones and all that sort of stuff, that they can target where they send messages to. So I've been called by her campaign 3 times, and they asked, if you were voting today, would you vote for Lori Lightfoot? And I said, if I was voting today, I wouldn't vote for Lori Lightfoot. If I was voting next week, I wouldn't vote for Lori Lightfoot. And when I vote in the election, I'm not voting for Lori Lightfoot.
But if it comes down to a one-on-one.
And they ask, and the lady took a sigh, like she was sitting next to Lori or something. And
well, I always, in my time as a journalist, I would never call an election until I knew who was running. And that's critical. Like this, as you mentioned at the very beginning, this is going to come down to a runoff.
Yes.
This won't be a Richard M. Daley kind of affair where he wins in the first round and we all go back to what we were doing.
I kind of like the idea that it's not going to happen
but this is going to be a runoff. And I think that is going to determine who's going to win. Remember 2019, I mean, Lori Lightfoot only got 18% of the vote, I think, in that first round. And that included only about 9%. That 18% would only count as about 9% of all the registered voters in the city of Chicago. So she didn't get anything anywhere near a mandate.
It was not a mandate.
During the runoff, she had Tony Preckwinkle, who had all of this baggage because of the pop tax and everything else. And I think a lot of people did not vote for Lori as much as they voted against Tony Preckwinkle, remembering all the bad publicity that Tony Preckwinkle got because of the pop tax and because she was so close to Alderman Edward Burke, who had been indicted by that time.
And she had been dishonest to the public about the whole thing. I mean,
about the
sugar tax.
Oh yes,
right.
Oh,
the sugar tax,
and
then she changed her story 2 or 3 times as to the reasoning for that, and then at the end, none of those stories that she told were accurate. So I think I voted against Tony Preckwinkle more than I voted for Lori Lightfoot. I didn't like Lori Lightfoot then. Because Lori Lightfoot was not truthful either. So about certain things that she did and said that she didn't do. But I said, you know what? I'm going to go in a different direction. I want another person to give them a chance. And we did that. We gave them a chance and they failed. Lori Lightfoot is not a good administrator.
Well, I think, we talked about this last time around that you want a candidate with a plan. You want a specific plan. Uh, plans are wonderful, but what happened to Lori's plan? I mean, did she have a plan?
No,
Yeah, she had a plan, but I tell you what, really,
she didn't have a real
I
plan.
think what sunk her this time around, why she's performing so poorly in the polls, some polls, I should say, because certainly I'm not that enamored of polls, is the whole character issue. The fact that she would use some of the language that she used when talking about in
Yes,
the political discourse.
yes, yes,
The fact that she said she had large,
yes,
non-existent male genitalia.
yes.
That stuff sticks, and that's the kind of thing that
And it's
sinks.
totally inappropriate
Totally
for a
inappropriate.
person who is holding the highest office in the city. When you are at that level of representation, you have to know that you are going to be challenged and hit with all kinds of questions and dissension. You have to, you have to be able to hold your composure and stay focused and respond to the substance and not the the noise. And that speaks volumes to me about a person in leadership.
And it's a character question. I mean, is that how you're going to act when you're under fire? You're going to call people names, and you're going to use foul language and such. I think that's the thing. I know that's the thing I look for in a candidate. How are you going to perform during the storm when it happens? How are you going to perform in the political debate, in the arena? How are you going to perform? And I didn't. I think in retrospect, I think Tony Preckwinkle would have done a better job.
Well,
She absolutely would
there's
have done a
no,
better job. She knows how to handle it.
there's no question in
Yeah.
my mind in terms of how to deal with responding to the public and criticism. Tony Preckwinkle, hands down,
Hands down.
would
I
have
remember Tony
handled it better.
Preckwinkle
And
whenever
she
I would
and
ask her a
she
question.
does.
Whenever I would ask Tony Preckwinkle a question, it could be in a heated moment, it could be at ease, whatever. I'd ask her the question, and there would be a 5-second pause. She would sit there and she would think about what she was going to say. Where Lori is exactly the opposite. She's immediately off the handle and she's going to say it.
Defensive.
Yeah, defensive, and that whole Napoleonic thing kicks in. That's what I call it. I'm nobody's psychologist, but it's like she's being under attack. I'm just asking a question. I'm not attacking you.
Right.
But that's the whole character piece.
She doesn't. She does not realize that she is the mayor, and that is the duty of the mayor. Is that you're going to get questions that are not going to be comfortable. Most of the time, you're going to get questions that are not comfortable, but you also have the advantage of having the seat and having access to information that other people don't necessarily have information to, and you should be able to respond in a way because people will let you get away with being incompetent if you are a nice person.
Let's talk for a minute about that. You sent me in text this survey. It wasn't a survey. It was what, questionnaire?
It was a questionnaire. It was a voter questionnaire.
And WBEZ did it.
Yes.
And it asked 20 or 23 questions.
23 questions.
23 questions, and you would answer each question. And at the end of the 23 questions, I guess they had a computer or something to crunch your answers, and they would, I guess they had some kind of algorithm that would make your answers, and you would get a sense of who of these 9 candidates, which one you supported, and they rank those candidates in descending order.
Yes.
Who do you mind talking about who your survey said you would support?
My survey said that I was didn't say who I would support. It just said who you were in line with.
Who you more in line with.
I was more in line with Brandon Johnson by 74%. I was least in line with Lori Lightfoot by 22%.
Wow. I was more in line with Paul Vallis at 78%. And I think Willie Wilson came in at 70%. And Lori Lightfoot was my last choice. And they didn't rank candidates by name when they gave you the 23
Yeah,
questions.
you had no idea.
No
that,
idea where you would come up, but
where
I
you would
came
come
up with
at.
Lori bringing up the rear, and Paul Vallis at the top.
I actually took a picture of mine, a screenshot
Really?
of mine.
Okay, I didn't do that, but yeah, I remember the numbers. And then we had people in the middle.
I was 50, I believe 56% aligned with Willie Wilson. He was like sixth in my on my list. It was a very interesting
phenomenon. I would recommend it for anyone, not to guide you in your vote, but just to get a sense of where these candidates, where you stand with the candidates. Some of the questions I didn't answer. It said no answer. You had that choice, and there were about 2, 3, maybe 4 questions where I actually put no answer down because I really didn't like the question. I mean, that they asked, and I didn't think I could fairly answer it because of how they asked it, because that's so important in all this polling and surveying and asking people where they stand. I mean, the questions are critical.
But I think the questions are critical, and they're tough questions. I think tough questions for voters to understand, as well as there's tough questions for people who are looking for the office to understand. So I think that it's going to be interesting. But coming up at 8:00, we're going to be talking with a mayoral candidate, Brandon Johnson. And in full disclosure, we have reached out to all of the candidates. All of the candidates have been invited to come on the program. We have no endorsement of any candidate. I don't have a candidate at this point, and I don't believe that. Do you have a candidate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to support Willie Wilson this first round. I think Willie Wilson is the only one that really comes in line with what
I do not.
I would want to do.
Yeah, but we are not officially. The People Show is not endorsing anyone.
No.
Now, I am leaning, in all fairness, because I like to be transparent with the public and certainly with people who look to me for some sort of guidance, that I'm leaning towards Brandon Johnson.
Let's save that for when Brandon comes on. You know, the other big story that happened, I guess, late last week and through the weekend and it continues today is this business in Memphis, Tennessee, where these 5 black police officers beat a man to death on camera. I was appalled when I saw the video. It was really tough falling asleep that night because, of all that's happened over the last 2 or 3 years in the United States, or last decade, really, when you go back to the Mike Brown situation and all that, and police brutality and the questions surrounding it. But seeing 5 black police officers do to this young man in Memphis what I saw happen, same thing I saw happen 30 years ago in Los Angeles, where I went to cover the Rodney King situation and the subsequent disturbances and riots and unrest, as they call it these days. What was your take on how do 5 black men who swore an oath of office do something like that? That's what I can't get my brain around.
I can get mine around it because it is a systemic problem that has been around since policing started. And so, in my view, it does not matter whether they were black, whether they were white, whether they were Hispanic. There is a systemic culture that there is this bias towards black people, black men in particular, by that so-called thin blue veil. It's a systemic problem. So the fact that they were black, they were police, and they believed in their mind, in my view, that or operated with that implicit bias towards a black person Um, and they also operated believing that whatever they did, they would be covered, that there was going to be the um, blue army that was going to be there for them, that's not going to be there for them. And they operated that way as though they were protected by that.
So you don't think that if this was a white person in the same situation as Mr. Nichols, the black victim, they wouldn't have done that to a white man?
No, absolutely not.
I agree with you. 100%.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
You know, there are many instances where have been worst situations with white people that were not treated the way that this black person was treated. Like, for example, there was a white man middle-aged man in Dallas or Texas on a park somewhere wielding a gun. And the police came and they talked to this man for 45 minutes, so much time that they had time to bring out cameras and SWAT and all that sort of stuff. And they shot the man with a rubber bullet.
But I tell you one thing, man. There's all of this, you know, having grown up in this country and worked an entire career and been retired for the last 6 years, I don't want to live someplace where there are not police. If police are systemically, if they have this problem, and it's pervasive around the country, as you say, and I got to agree with you on that, what do we do? Where does it start to begin to fix the situation in law enforcement in the United States? I mean, what do we do? If they don't do it to white people, and apparently they're really not doing it to other groups of people the way they do it to black men, how do we fix that? What's the remedy here?
Well, I believe that the standard operating procedures of police have to be incinerated because they have never been incinerated. There's no such thing as, in my view, of reform. You can't reform something that is.
So what do you do?
Well, wait, let me just finish. What has to happen is they have to take the standard operating procedures and throw them into an incinerator. And then they have to bring people of today, black professionals of today, around the table and rewrite how policing is done in this country from municipality to municipality, state to state. That has to happen if there's going to be real reform. If that is not going to take place, we are going to be right back here reporting on the next story of the bias or this type of thing. I think that I will not watch the video. I read the entire indictment, and I don't need to see the horrifying brutalization reminder of how black people were treated and seeing other black people. Basically, when I heard about it and when I saw that there were 5 black police officers, it took me to Fannie Lou Hamer, where the jailers forced 2 black prisoners to beat her until they ran out of energy and then brought in another to beat her.
Yeah. Well, they do that. I mean, that's been a recurring incident in our history that goes back to slavery, where they would hunt you down with black people. They ran those dogs at you,
right?
And turn them loose on another black person,
right? Well, they told these 2 black men that if you didn't beat her, if you don't beat her, you have it coming to you. I still have I have a problem. I still have a problem with it. I have a problem with it because I just think that we are supposed to die for our women. We are supposed to die and sacrifice ourselves for our children. So when I read the account of that story, and I saw this, it took me to that very moment when I just heard about this horrifying.
Yeah,
Horrifying
we're
situation.
talking about an undertaking, though. When you talk about blowing up police stations, police departments, not stations, but police departments all over the country, including
Now
federal.
don't say blowing up
Well,
because I don't want people to think about.
I said
I'm talking
blowing
about
up police departments. I mean,
the operating
I just use that as a
procedures.
figure of
Okay.
speech. I
Yes.
use that as a figure of
Yeah.
speech in terms of You said incinerating what their standard operating
Operating
procedures.
procedures.
Incinerating, that's burning them up. That's burning them up. However, that is such a massive undertaking that I believe has to happen from the very top. I mean, I'm talking like uh, federal law enforcement as well as local law enforcement has to be dealt with at some point in terms of making sure that they operate in a just, equitable way.
Right.
I mean, there's going to be instances where cops get into it with suspects of people.
There should not be this privilege. They believe in many instances that they have the privilege to abuse and to murder people because they happen to be black.
I don't. Well, they have this thing, and I think it's going to be central to the what's it called, qualified immunity.
Yes.
Yeah, that's going to be central to the debate. To what is that, and do they have
What it is?
Well, I know what it is.
Okay.
We all know what it is, but I mean, is it part of the problem that police officers, some of them and a minority, believe they can go out and do the kinds of things that happened to Mr. Nichols in Memphis and not suffer any consequences? These cops thought they could get away with it. That is such a sobering, really, fact at this point.
Mhm.
They thought that what they did, they obviously thought they were going to get away with it.
That they were immune to
Yeah.
any type of consequences.
Exactly.
They thought
qualified
and-
immunity. Is
and
that
this
what they call it?
That's what they call it.
Well, we're going to
And
have to.
we
That
we
has
need
to
to
be dealt
do
with.
away with qualified immunity. I believe that things like there needs to be law enforcement they should have some type of liability insurance. I think that law enforcement people should go under stringent psychological evaluation. And I think that should be an ongoing thing. I also think that police officers should not be working these massive hours of overtime and that sort of thing. I think that they should have to have some type of liability insurance. I don't know if I said that or not, but I think they should have some accountability to that. But I think that as a police officer, because you're entrusted with such power, that the consequences to you betraying the public's trust should be severe. They should be severe, but you should also, I think we also have to take into account that we can't just have this paintbrush that we mark all police officers by, because it's not. Some police officers become police officers so that they can do this sort of thing. Some police officers,
Well, maybe, yeah,
become police
at the
officers so they
same
can have this
time,
power to do this kind of thing.
but we
Like the
also-
guy in Chicago that got caught in a bar wielding a gun at somebody.
in Milwaukee.
No, in Chicago.
But there was a
In
guy in
Chicago,
Milwaukee
and he
who's
didn't get the job
Chicago
here in
cop.
Chicago, but then he
I
got
think
hired
but
in the
bar
suburb.
the bar was, I believe, in that case was in Milwaukee.
Yes.
But whatever. I mean,
Whatever the case
he
is.
shouldn't be in a bar.
shouldn't
with
be a
gun,
police officer.
pointing a gun. Exactly.
Mhm.
But we have to. We also have to consider that these guys are out there doing this. Most of them probably for $75,000 to $100,000 a year.
Mhm.
And when you think about the consequences of what could happen on the street, are we going to get people to be able to do that job? But you're putting your life on the line anyway. Whether you're a good cop, bad cop, you're putting your life on the line when you go out there. When you think about all the criminals that are out there who are armed and who will do to you, just horrible things. They'll kill you. So you're out there in the street and you're on edge, and you're doing all this for $75,000, $85,000 a year. I mean, that's a seasoned cop without overtime.
Mhm.
But we're not paying them very much. And we expect people to do that. And if you look at the roster or the numbers of people who will take the police test, even here in Chicago, numbers are way down. Nobody wants the job. Are we headed to a situation where we don't have any police officers? Anybody who will take the job as a cop? That's a question that we have to deal with as we deal with these other issues. Because, quite frankly, I do not want to live in a city that doesn't have a good, solid police force that's going to serve and protect the citizenry.
Well, I don't want to live in a city, in a place where people take a job to serve and protect, to use it to abuse and murder.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to live in that city either. I don't want to live in a city where people who are really signing up to do a job because they believe that they're doing a great civil service, and they are when it is being done in the proper manner. And I believe that most people come into the job to do the right thing, but
not enough people are coming into the job.
Well, I think part of the problem is that there are some cops that are bad, were bad, and the fraternity has protected them. When a cop goes bad and goes off the rail and betrays their oath and their duty, they shouldn't be protected. They should be terminated and suffer the consequences.
Should police
they bring a bad light on the bigger force when
should
that happens.
Police officers have a union? We can't have it. So, for instance, we can't have a union in the military. I mean, can't happen. Mm-hmm. Can't happen. It's a command structure. You do what you're told. That's the military.
Mm-hmm.
Should police, who are a quasi-military operation, let's be real, they have ranking and command,
mm-hmm.
should they be allowed to have a union? I'm not talking about public unions in general. I support those. But what about cops? Should cops have a union?
The kind of union that we see that they have, they should not have.
A union. A union's a union.
I can't answer that. It's a very good question. And we should think about it. But I think that people who are working should have some level of representation to be protected, but they certainly should not have representation to protect them against wrongdoing. I don't care what kind of union
wrongdoing in most vast majority of cases is an allegation. It's not. It's an allegation against someone. In fact, against these 5 cops, it's an allegation. I mean, they are innocent, quote unquote, until proven guilty. And believe me, they're going to be proven guilty because the video speaks for itself. But in the vast majority of cases where there is no video, there are allegations, and they have to stand up to scrutiny, and they have a union who will get them an attorney, which will support them, which will put issues in their contract that will protect them from certain allegations and give them a due process. Should we have that?
No, we should not have that.
That's a short answer.
We should not have that. That's why I'm saying there are certain things that should not be there. We should not have unions paying for lawyers against people who are accused of committing crimes. Just like anybody else that is accused of committing a crime, you have to go out and get a lawyer. If you can't afford one, you'll be provided one, a public defender, and you get a chance to defend yourself against the allegations. And if the allegations are found to be true, then you suffer the consequences of those allegations. If not, if you're proven not to be. Now, even if you're proven not to have committed a crime, doesn't mean that you still should go back and become a police officer.
And we also have to keep in mind that the vast, vast, vast majority of these police abuse cases do not involve death. It could be something as simple as making you come out of your car, drop to your knees, and they abuse you, call you names, and do things that they shouldn't do. People complain about them, and the police officer comes up on charges that this citizen says you abused him or her. What do you have to say about that officer? Well, at that point, the union intervenes and they protect this cop. And it's sort of like the broken windows theory that they talk about in some cities. So a cop is abusing people with words now,
right?
And he's not being disciplined for that because his union has protected him. Then suddenly that escalates into something far worse, where he's committing physical violence,
particularly when they're black.
Well, yeah, I'm not. But the thing is, we're not going to be able to write any laws just for black people.
Well, we have to do something about the implicit bias.
I get that, but the law itself is not going to be written for black people. It's going to benefit black people, absolutely.
Why? They wrote laws against black people.
In the law, you can't do this to a black
person.
Well,
why not? They wrote laws against black people.
But they ain't going to do it for black people. Take my word for it. They won't do it for us. But whether they say that the law has to be. I mean, I think you're onto something, and I think I'm onto something too. When you talk about should a police force have a union that can run interference,
not in the structure that is set up today.
Okay, I think we agree on something.
It's
not gonna. It hasn't worked.
No,
it hasn't worked.
It has not worked.
Yeah, you can't go on strike. You can't. If you are accused of abuse, you have to deal with what amounts to the equivalent of a military tribunal, where you are going to be disciplined, and the civilians, of course, are going to control the military like they should on the federal level. I mean, there's a Secretary of Defense or whatever, and there's a mayor, and there are other elected officials who can supervise the situation to make sure that the military does what it's supposed to do, serve and protect in terms of with a police force. But the fact that cops get away with all kinds of things short of murder,
all kinds of stuff,
right? And I'm speaking as a pro police kind of guy.
I'm a pro police guy.
Call the cops if I see you don't look right. I'm on the phone calling the police. It's these bad apples out there, and a lot of them in Chicago have been black. Man, what's the one guy? He's still got cases that they're throwing out. Man.
Oh, you're talking about Ronald Robinson, 200 black people that he has.
This other guy, Ron, whatever his name is, the guy with the glasses who
Watts.
I mean, these are black cops. What do you think?
200 black people that he trumped up charges on.
Absolutely, but in that same, I bet you, can you imagine the things that he did to people physically? I mean, on the street, if he had that mindset that he didn't respect anybody, and he
didn't respect anybody black.
Well,
because it was 200 black people. 200 black.
I get it, but then there's a guy that, what's his name, Mejanowski or whatever, a few years ago, crooked cop, white cop, who was doing basically the same thing.
Oh, John Burge.
John Burge, he went after black people.
Yeah,
he went after black people. This other guy, Mejanowski, he went after white drug dealers and ne'er-do-wells, and he would shake them down. And I think he's in federal penitentiary now.
Good.
Or whatever. But
I think that Ronald Watts should serve as much time as the 200 people that he falsely charged or brought under these charges, because look at what happened to their lives. The damage that he has caused to their lives, he should be serving time for every year that those 200 people, he should get 200 years. He should have a lot of time to think about it.
Yeah.
Behind bars.
And he probably will. I mean, I would hope, but it's a I mean, it's just, I mean, I think the whole notion of you know what's going to happen to these guys who did this to this these black cops who did this to this black man.
They should be in jail for as long as he is dead. They should be in
Well,
jail.
the thing is, it's going to be an interesting. It's going to be an interesting event. Their trial, their trials, and how this is eventually dealt with, because black on black crime, as you know, is not given the same attention as black on white crime. Or yeah, I mean, I want to see what happens. I mean, right now we're all in the midst of it, and we're very emotional about what we've seen. But I
Angry,
want to see
very angry.
what the system does, because right now, you can commit a crime in the black community. A black man can shoot another black man, and then suddenly nobody gets arrested. Nobody really looks for the perpetrator. I want to see what happens here. I want to see if they treat this with the same kind of enthusiasm as they would if, as we said earlier, this had been a white victim. I want to see that, and this right now, I think they should, but we're in the midst of it. And
I believe
everybody's
that
talking
they. I
about
believe that they will, because the light is on.
Yeah, but
The light is on, and again, with all that we're talking about now, I'm putting on a lawyer's hat, is that they still have to go to trial, and they still are going to be afforded their right of due process as provided under the Constitution, as they should. But it should be speedy, and I'm glad it was speedy. It was 19 days that they fired them and brought charges about 4 days later or something like that. And I think that there should be a thorough investigation. And I believe that the state's attorney and his lawyers, I think that they have worked uh, very tirelessly to pull the threads together to make sure that they're going to get the kinds of convictions that they should get. And every one of them should be in jail as long as that boy is dead.
second-degree murder.
I don't care what the charge is. They should be in jail.
Well,
as long as he is dead, they should be in jail.
Well, again, we'll see what happens. I was very surprised and pleased that there wasn't a great degree of civil unrest in the aftermath of this.
Well, I think because of the way that they handled it. I think because of the way that the chief of police and the way that the officials of Memphis handled this mitigated that, because we've never had that kind of speedy arrest when it comes to police officers.
You think that was because they were black?
No, I don't think it was because they were black. I know that people are going to take that and put that, but I don't believe that it was because it was black. But I believe that the chief of police there, who was a black woman, who saw this as horrific as it is, and the state's attorney saw this as horrific as it is and was, and they said, and that we have to do the right thing. We have to do the right thing. She just made the decision that what she saw was horrific and was wrong, and she made a decision. I think maybe in a different city, in Chicago, don't know if that would have happened that quickly. Look at Jason Van Dyke, who murdered.
Yeah, and he's out now.
Who murdered Laquan McDonald.
He's out now.
And
he's walking around.
He's walking around and probably enjoying, a pretty good life that the FOP is probably subsidizing.
Well, he worked at the FOP headquarters.
Yes.
During the time that he was on trial.
Yes.
And being his case was being litigated, he was working, getting a salary. I don't know how much, probably not much, but from the FOP, they kept him afloat. That's been, the story to this point. These cops, if they go down, as you say, for as long as the victim is dead, then perhaps it'll send a message around the country to other cops that this is what can happen to you if you violate your oath.
I would like and hope to believe that, but given the history, I just don't look.
You don't have any.
We just look. We just did it in Minnesota and Georgia. The police officers, or not the police officers. I'm sorry, in Minnesota, Minneapolis, where those police officers just got all that time for the George Floyd thing on video, with his hands in his pocket and his knees on his neck. They just got a lot of time, and here it is. What? Not even a couple of years later, we are at this point. And who knows, maybe it's happened again and we just don't know about it. There's another story out there. So I would love to say that I would hope that it sends a message. But given the history, I'd have to see it.
Well, it's going to have to be fixed, or there won't be a Memphis or a Chicago or a Minneapolis or New York or Los Angeles or whatever, because there'll be chaos. It's got to stop. There's got to be some enlightened leadership to end it. And right now, I really don't know that even here in the city of Chicago, in the aftermath of this, that we have heard enough, certainly, from the leadership, from the mayor, from the police superintendent, from others who were involved in law enforcement here. I don't know that we've really heard any of the kinds of things we've been talking about tonight. When we talked about whether or not there should be a police union, what can it do, or what should it be able to do? I haven't heard from the mayor at this point about Chicago and how I heard about them bracing themselves for possible unrest once this video was released, but I didn't hear about any long-term, any ideas about how to fix it. It'll be interesting to talk to Commissioner Johnson in a few minutes about that. He's going to be appearing here shortly, in the next 10, 15 minutes, to talk about his campaign, but we certainly will ask him about his ideas in terms of what to do about this.
Well, they're all scrambling. I'm sure they're all scrambling so that they can have the right talking points. But I want and certainly hope that they are having a genuine conversation with experts, because you can't. No one person can come up with all the answers. And I would hope that they would be talking to real counsel about how to fix this problem, because it's got to be fixed. It's got to be fixed. And I think that too much of a pass has been given. And while I am a pro-police person, there are problems. There are problems that have been ignored for a long time.
And the thing about it right now, this problem is exacerbated by an uptick in crime, or at least the public perception that there's been an uptick in crime. Crimes, in large part, not in large part, in most part, committed by young black males. And the problem there is going to be, how do police work to preempt some of these crimes from happening in neighborhoods around the city? I'm speaking of Chicago now. How are police going to preempt those crimes without making a large number of stops of, guess who? Young black males, because the police know who the vast majority of the suspects are in these cases, these carjackings and robberies and such. So if I'm a cop and I'm on the street, that's who I'm going to look at, and I'm going to look for the people that my intelligence, to an investigator, are telling me are doing it. So I'm going to profile people. What about this whole profiling business, and how do you preempt crimes from happening and prevent them from happening in the future? Which again, that goes not only to the police on the street, but also to the state's attorney's office in terms of making sure that these criminals, repeat criminals in particular, are kept away from law-abiding citizens.
Well, this goes to another side of dealing with the social ills, social economic ills that are producing these situations that have not been dealt with in decades, that has to be dealt with. It has to be dealt with, and it has to be dealt with in an acute and an aggressive manner to reverse these exclusionary, impoverished condition that produces what we are experiencing in some areas of our lives. That has to be dealt with. And it is working in another place. And
Where's it working
I've just had in Mississippi. I've just had a conversation with one of the legislators and Joe Max Higgins down there, and I asked them. I said, we didn't really talk about the crime part of the situation on there. I was like, how did what you're doing there? How did that impact the crime situation in your area? And they said the numbers precipitously went down. Precipitously went down. That and so we have to tackle that. We have to grapple with it, and we have to be aggressive about grappling with it. And when we deal with it, we are going to address these conditions where police officers are not put into the position of being the resolution of all of the social ills. I think that there is also that burden that is put on police officers to try to figure this out, and I think that is a problem too. That they should. This is not the answer. Is not police. And this get tough on them means get tough on black people, where these kinds of things in Memphis happen.
Well, black people are committing most of the crimes. I mean, let's be, the black, if cops are going to get tough on criminals, they're going to find that they're going to be confronted with black criminals more often than any other group.
If we do something about the conditions that black people are suffering from, then we won't have black people committing most of these crimes.
We got to get to it.
We have to deal with it.
We got to get to it. I think that the leadership, certainly in this region, is going to have to get to that. And they have certainly not done a very good job of it over the past, 50, 75 years in terms of really, certainly haven't done much in the last 10, 15 years.
In the last 30 years.
Well, but I think it's been exacerbated. It's getting worse.
Yes.
And there have there been periods where it has abated somewhat? And what can we learn from that?
No, there hasn't been any periods where it's abated in the black community. It's been getting worse and worse and worse. And because they didn't do anything about it when it was not as bad, it's bad. It's worse. Now, so I am saying is that we all have to get there, all of the leadership. And what I want to see, I want to see whoever the next mayor is. I want to see the next mayor sit down at a table with the Cook County Board President, with the governor. I want to see them sitting at a table because they have to work together. This idea of them pitting themselves against each other is costing us. It's wrong. And that, to me, is ineffective leadership. The mayor pitting themselves against the governor or the governor against the mayor. And no, you all are working for us and supposed to be working in tandem to make it better for the citizens that you are working for. I want to see that nonsense stop too.
Well, I think the scenario that you depict is going to take some time, perhaps even a generation, to fix it. You've got to get some companies in here to provide some economic wherewithal for people who right now don't have much. And I don't hear of very many companies lining up to come to Chicago,
Nobody's
Northern
asking
Illinois.
them.
Well, let me finish. That are lining up to go to Mississippi and the Golden Triangle, where you and I have both talked to people down there, and they're basically very interested in that area, and some huge companies, international companies, have moved into the area around Columbus, Starkville. What's the third city down there? Anyway, but it's a triangle.
Activa.
And it's, pardon?
Activa.
Activa. Okay, I would never have remembered that one. But they've moved. They're moving there. These are international companies. What was the Japanese tire company moved down there, and they
Yokohama
pay people.
Tire.
Right.
Yokohama Tire. They were going in a different place. You know why they're there? Because Joe Max Higgins would not accept no as an answer.
Well, Joe Max Higgins is the guy who's in charge of economic development down there, who spurred it. You can Google him.
That a headhunter in Chicago found him.
Yeah, but you can Google that.
Yes.
And you can find out who Joe Max Higgins is, and you can see that story. It's a fascinating story. You turned me on to it, and 60 Minutes did a piece about it. 2016 about how they had basically flipped the script. And this is a predominantly black region in Mississippi. People went from picking cotton, or the culture surrounding picking cotton, to now they're working industrial sized jobs.
Yes.
Now, can you do that in a place like Chicago?
Yes.
Where the unions are not going to let you come in here and open a factory and pay people $25, $30 an hour? And that's the question. Well, and that's why Amazon, a lot of the big companies,
Amazon did.
Amazon did what?
They have 13 facilities.
Exactly. And that's fine. That's fine. But I'm talking about, and people are working, black people working at Amazon.
Yes.
Okay. And that's an example of people that can do that. They're not manufacturing anything. They're a shipping company, and they're handling shipping. But I'm talking about manufacturing jobs.
We can do it.
That
we can make it can be a good working partnership that it is a win-win-win situation. But there has to be the will to do it.
There has to be the will, but I'm telling you, the will has to be on the part of the political leadership.
Absolutely.
But it also has to be on the part of labor. Labor has to say, okay, we see a problem. We agree that this is a problem, and we're going to help our region solve it.
And if they don't,
we're going to make deals with companies that are looking for places to land, particularly in the EV business, the electric vehicle business. They're opening factories,
chip
throughout the United States, chip manufacturing, another one. I mean, you look at the big Foxconn business.
You should ask Willie to bring his manufacturer back here.
Foxconn wanted to be near O'Hare.
Yeah.
Right. The big Taiwanese.
Well, we need to build a third airport
company or whatever they are.
Yes.
Well, but let's face it. Let's look at Foxconn just momentarily. They wanted to be near O'Hare, but they wouldn't set up shop in Illinois. They went to southern Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a hardcore labor state as far as I'm concerned, but they didn't do it in Illinois. And you have to ask why. Why wouldn't you? Why do you have to go all? Maybe they wanted space in southern Wisconsin, certainly. But we have to become more competitive.
Well, the problem is with O'Hara is at its capacity for cargo and for domestic.
But you can get play anywhere in the world from O'Hare. Rivian, the big the truck company, the electric vehicle company, they have a shop in Normal, Illinois, and I think it was probably attracted there maybe during the Quinn administration. Probably, it was Quinn, I think, who attracted them there. But they wanted to expand. They went to Georgia because it's a right to work state.
Well. We have a couple of situations where we lost a U.S. UPS and FedEx, not because it was a right to work, was because they couldn't get their stuff in and out, which is why we need to have that third airport. We'll talk more about that at another time. All right, we got to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to be talking with the mayoral candidate, Brandon Johnson, is going to be joining us for the next hour right here on The People Show with Mark Wallace and Charles Thomas. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the 8 o'clock hour of the People Show. It is 8:09. Brandon Johnson's going to be joining us in just a few minutes, but before we left the break, we were talking about locations of some of the companies, and I was sharing that in my working with Del Marie Cobb and Congressman Robin Kelly, who is continuing the effort to build this third airport that the FAA said that we need to build here in Illinois because Midway and O'Hare are at their maximum capacity, which is going to be a cargo. It's going to start off as a cargo airport. It's already an airport now, but to expand it.
Have you been out to the south suburbs lately?
Yes.
And you go to places like University Park, Matheson, what's
Homewood.
But I'm speaking of places where they built these absolutely enormous warehouses. Amazon
manufacturing.
Yeah,
most of them are over 100,000 square
Walmart
feet.
has a facility. Sam's Club, I should say,
Yes.
has a facility in Matheson, and there are big trucking firms, logistics companies that are building these huge depots where they can run their trucks in and out of that will service these warehouses, and it's all along Highway 57,
right,
in that area, and this stuff has just popped up in the last 3 to 5 years.
10 years.
Yeah, Well, but 3 to 5 years, it's really, because I think at Markham, there's another huge warehouse. The next time this conversation begins about the third airport in that Peatone area, whatever they don't like to say Peatone, but
because it's not.
That's one of the towns. But anyway, that are near it. But at any rate, the next time there's a conversation about that, Jeff Bezos will have his people at the table. He has to, because he's running all that freight out of those big warehouses. To have an international airport with huge runways nearby to bring stuff into Chicago, into the region, you got to have it. At this point, it's a no-brainer. Here it comes. You want to?
Well, yeah, I've had conversations.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that Brandon Johnson's on the line
Johnson
right now.
is joining us, and so we're going to bring him on right now. Okay, joining us right now is mayoral candidate Brandon Johnson is joining Mark Wallace and Charles Thomas on these final 40 minutes of the People Show, and we're going to be talking about his candidates. He is the Cook County Commissioner. Of which district are you the county commissioner of, Brandon?
It's the first district representing the mighty west side of the city of Chicago and the western suburbs. So good evening to both of you, Charles and Mark. Appreciate you all having me on this evening.
Hey, Brandon, has there ever been a Chicago mayor from the west side?
Hey, so I'm glad you mentioned that. So I actually think that this is technically the answer is yes, because they count Cermak.
Okay, as a west sider.
Taylor. Yeah, as a west sider. Now, look, if we're talking about west side, we're just going to say no. That I'll be the first mayor of the city of Chicago with a west side address. Like, legitimate
west side.
Yeah, and we can expect big changes on the west side if Brandon Johnson becomes the mayor of the city of Chicago.
Yeah, I think the city of Chicago, is really positioned for big changes and for a better, stronger, safer Chicago. In fact, Charles, I'm glad you raised the fact that the west side of Chicago, the south side of Chicago, southeast, southwest, these parts of the city have been ailing for a very long time. And when you have a particular part of your body that's ailing, you don't treat it. That inevitably is going to impact the rest of the body. And so that's why all of us are feeling less safe and are very much bothered by the direction in which this city is headed in, because it just has not addressed in an equitable way the type of severe trauma that we are living under, and we're seeing the manifestation of that play out in the most violent ways.
You say it, and you say it very eloquently, but mayoral candidates in the past, in fact, several incumbents, will say the same thing. Why will you be different?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that the politics of old, the same tired, recycled talking points have left, our families behind. There's no one, Charles, in this race that has a greater incentive for the city of Chicago to be better, stronger, and safer than someone who's raising their family on the west side of Chicago. I mean, look, I love Austin. It's the place that my wife and I were very intentional about selecting as a place where we wanted to raise our family. But as beautiful and as dynamic as Austin is, it is one of the most violent neighborhoods in the entire city. I've shared this with Mark. I've had to change a window for one of the bullets that have come through my home. I've had to cover our children numerous times as gunshots ring out right outside our front door. So this is not a nightly news story. This is what we live every single day. And that's why what I am proposing, which is different than not just this administration, but previous administrations, is actually investing in people. The safest cities in America all have one thing in common. They invest in people. And that's how we're going to get ourselves out of this marry clay, as we would say in the church, and out of this rut of instability, and of course, a pathway towards a safer, stronger, better Chicago.
All right, Brandon. Now, you and I have had some conversation, and I have mentioned this before to Charles and also to our listening audience that I've had the opportunity to sit down with you before you announced that you were running for mayor, and we've had some brief conversations since you have announced, and I'm hoping that we will be able to sit down and have some substantive conversations about a plan that is working in another area, and hope that you will commit to that plan and running on that plan and committing to making that plan happen here in Chicago on the south and west side to deal with the social economic chronic areas. All right. So I want to ask you specifically. I talked to you about the Golden Triangle down in Mississippi. Will you support and will you actively commit to putting forth that idea here in Chicago if you are elected as mayor?
So I've reviewed that plan. I'm very much intrigued by that. Here's what I can commit to. I'm committing to investing in our people. And there are elements and tenets of that plan that speak to the type of economic security that our communities need. But what I can say, though, Mark, is that there are a number of plans that have an approach that gets us to the end in which you're describing. What I do not want to do is make a direct commitment to any specific plan without having real conversation and buy-in from community. And this is what I've said to you, and I'm committed to doing this, is that in order for the city of Chicago to be a better, stronger, safer city, we have to retire the old way of doing politics. I'm a strong believer in co-governance. What I'm willing to do and what I will commit to is taking the budget plan that I presented, that no other candidate has done, and line that up with the plan that you have presented to me and other plans that have been submitted to me, whether it's environmental plans, educational plans, holistic plans in which you're describing. And let's put that before the people and organize a real commitment around it, so it's not left up to an individual to determine what's best for the entire city of Chicago. That is not the way I was raised. I come from a large family, Mark, as you know. It was 10 of us with foster siblings as well, with one bathroom. I've learned to collaborate and work with people. I like what's happening in the description of this plan and this proposal, but I also recognize that we have to go into communities and render this to people so that the people can provide some assessment and feedback from it. Because the way it worked in the place of which you're describing, we want to make sure that it's a fit for the neighborhoods in which we are living in.
Brandon, you've been involved in the labor movement for a long time. Do you think that
to a co-governance structure?
But do you think that organized labor in Chicago, what would be their involvement in a situation such as the one that's appears to be working in Mississippi? Do you think that, which is a right to work state, do you think something like that could work here? Do you think the unions in Chicago would accommodate something like that? Because we're not a right to work state. In fact, we have very strong commitments to unions and collective bargaining here. They don't have that in Mississippi. Can something like that work here? Would unions go for it?
Well, that's a great question, and that's why this is not me being hesitant to make a commitment. There are dynamics here in the city of Chicago, that hold us all accountable. Now, as far as what labor how they will interact with this particular proposal, that's why we want to take it to them. Look, there's no secret here, right? Institutional racism exists in all sectors. And of course that plays out in our trades as well, in a very dramatic way, right? Look, we know, where the Black liberation movement, bumped up against the interest of corporations and powerful government spaces that did not see the identity of my Blackness, and why we had to have an entire movement around that I am a man, right? And that was the right for individuals, to be Black men in particular, to work in a safe environment that paid a livable wage, right? And so there's a long history of Black liberation being attached to the labor movement. And like institutional racism in all sectors, we've been met with, institutional structures that have made it hard, darn near impossible for Black people in particular to be able to access, these opportunities, right? And so it's why I proposed, and you're going to see this in my budget plan, an expansion of workforce development that deals with the vacancy, the abandonment in our community, where we can put our people to work, to rehab homes, develop trades and skills, get them on a pathway of fast track as they develop their skills on site to work, a fast track to getting their union card, going through the apprenticeship program. But we can get on-job training, just like my father experienced, learning to work with his hands because he was taught by his uncle, right? And so we can rehab homes, deal with the vacancy, put people in the homes with first-time home buyer assistance opportunities, much like my wife and I experienced as public employees. Charles, man, my wife and I, we were making $80,000 combined, and we were the richest people in our family. And we needed 2 government programs to help us purchase that home. And so that home is going through repair now. And of course, we're using folks from the neighborhood. There is a model in which that Mark has presented that speaks to us developing our young men and women on site, getting them onto a pathway so that they can actually receive their full-fledged union cards, while putting working people back in a situation where we can afford to live here. This is why I'm not opposed to the plan. I'm just not going to dictate the plan. We're going to organize the plan.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm not suggesting to dictate, but I've been involved with this plan since 2016. In fact, Charles and I sort of organically come together on it because I ran into Charles a few years ago and brought him along, and he agreed, and we talked to the people who have executed the plan down in Mississippi. And I, being in the real estate business now for 42 years, realize that in order to do the kinds of things that you just talked about in your plan in terms of home ownership and that sort of thing, you have to have a strong workforce. And that strong workforce will drive home ownership, will drive the opportunity for people to learn. Absolutely, we have to have an unconventional way to reinvest in people who have been marginalized in Chicago. At 47% unemployment in Black males 18 to 25. We have to do it.
Mark, you're absolutely right. With urgency, I'm sorry, I jumped in. I mean, it's 8 o'clock, so I might say anything tonight. My communications director is probably panicking. I'm getting a little hyped because when during the Great Depression era, unemployment had reached 30% amongst white men. And this country called it a national crisis. They didn't call it entitlement. They didn't call it welfare. They called it a national crisis. And they gave white men shovels before there was stuff to dig. It gave them access to housing, education, jobs, and as they should have. I'm not even saying that they shouldn't have done it. I'm saying, to your point, Mark, this is why, and I know you weren't suggesting dictating. That was my language as a demonstration of how committed I am to co-governance, brother. So, I do recognize that I didn't want to characterize your presentation as such. I didn't take it that way. I just want people to know I'm absolutely clear. This is not going to be our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents' mayoral of office anymore. It's going to be a different office. And so as you're describing the fact that economic security comes with W-2, that's how you have a better, stronger, safer Chicago. Business can't thrive if they don't have a workforce, right?
Absolutely.
Workforce cannot grow and expand if they don't have folks that are trained. Mark, we talked about this. What is it, like 30,000 manufacturing vacancies right now? Most of them in the city of Chicago. The problem is the education system and the workforce, there's too much of a gap in between. If you're poor and hungry and unhoused, you go from kindergarten to 12th grade, you finally get your high school diploma, and someone comes up to you and says, you know what? You're not done yet. You got to go to school for 4 more years. You got to borrow $100,000, and you're never going to get out of debt. That's discouraging, man. It's like, bump that, right? And so workforce development, as you're describing, putting our people to work, and yes, challenging the trade, to make sure that we are being equitably supported, that ultimately leads to generational wealth. And then they get on to home ownership, and those individuals who want to imbibe the entrepreneur spirit of our people, they'll have some disposable income to jumpstart that business. And then those businesses can be sustained because we have bus operators, train operators, electricians, plumbers, teachers, nurses, right? Folks who want to go into public safety. These are all opportunities for our people, and it's available for us. It's available for us, and quite frankly, that's why I'm running for mayor, to finally put an end to this tale of two cities and usher in a stronger, better, safer, more united Chicago. I've done it as an organizer. We've had some fights, right? We've had some disagreements, but we have stood the test of time. We have remained on course, arguing and fighting and organizing for the interests of working people, and I'm going to do that as the next mayor of the city of Chicago.
Why
we have someone who loves people enough to invest in them.
Brandon, I mean, you know, the most impressive scene in your television commercial to me is when you are there with your family, black man, wife, children. You know, to me, that says more about your campaign than anything else. But I got to ask you something. Why has black leadership failed? Why are we still here talking about these problems when we have black leaders everywhere? I mean, the leadership of this region really is predominantly black. And you're a black man, you want to be mayor. Why should we even consider that an asset? Because there has been such failure on the part of black leadership. Or maybe you don't think that black leadership in the city and this region has failed.
You know, as I said earlier, there's no one in this race that I believe has more of an incentive for the city of Chicago to work. No one in this race that has more of an incentive for the city to work.
But what's the question is, why do you think they fail?
But I want to make sure that I'm being vulnerable here, because Charles, anyone who believes that we've done enough, they're wrong, and they're being and part of the failures of leadership in the city of Chicago is because too many individuals seek public office without a real connection and understanding of what people need. Look, Charles, you knew me before I was an elected official. Mark, you've known me. You know, brother, I'm the dude with the unshaved beard and the hoodie. I never thought in a million years I would run for office, but that's why I ran for office. And this is no disrespect to the individual that I beat, but what he was calling for and how he saw the budget was a failure to the very people that he was sent to represent. And the failures happen, in my opinion, is because you don't have leadership, enough leadership. I should say you don't have it. You don't have enough leadership that possess what I believe are the skills that are necessary to be an effective leader.
You mean like
you have to be 50.
I mean, we got a county board president, we have a black mayor, we have a black state's attorney, we have a black lieutenant governor, we have black people. I missed a lot of them, believe me. County clerk, we got all these people, and I don't. And you're talking about what we need to do. Why haven't we done it? These people not. You used the word disconnected. But I think I heard you say that.
Yeah.
But you're connected and they're not. Is that the play?
Saying that people break promises. Mayor Lori Lightfoot broke promises, and she's not the first politician to do that. So she broke her promises. She said she believed in everything that we believed in as a people, as a movement. I'm a part of a larger political movement, and broke every single promise. Charles, since I've been in office, I've kept and maintained every single thing that I said I was going to fight for. And that's why the gang database is gone, which was targeting black people. There was a person on the gang database who was 6 years old, another one who was 104, and we weren't safer. I said that we're going to end housing discrimination. There was a bill that was on the county board for 4 years and no one moved it. I got it passed in 4 months. We eliminated housing discrimination against those who were seeking housing, who are returning citizens who've been locked up. I said I was going to have a budget that was built around the lives of Black people. I'm the only person in this entire state, arguably in the country, that put together an entire budget built around Black people. Charles, for that reason that you're talking about. Because obviously I represent an entire district and the entire county of Cook. But as I said earlier, if there's a particular part of your body that's ailing and you don't treat that part of your body, the rest of your body will be impacted. And that's what people are experiencing in the city of Chicago right now. This is why I'm the only person who released the budget plan, Charles.
Well, let me
I'm going to tell people the truth.
Let me ask you this.
And the reason why people fail, let me just say this last part. The reason why I believe that we have failures in our community, because we don't have enough people who can demonstrate in an authentic way their love for our people. If you love our people, you would not call for Black men and Black women to be hunted down. If you love Black people, you would not have had a budget like Paul Vallis passed over 20 years ago when they did not hold up to their responsibility to protect the retirement of working people, which overwhelmingly, Charles, those working people who have pensions make up the zip codes in which Black people live in. And if you were to take those Black pensioners out of those zip codes, our economy will collapse. And Paul Vallis is the reason why we are in this financial predicament now, because he had a jacked up budget in over 20 years ago. And now we're dealing with the issue where everybody in this campaign, the only thing that they're committed to doing is raising property taxes. And I'm saying I'm not going to do it.
But you say you're going to raise a lot of other taxes.
Let me say this. We're speaking of taxes, all right? If we're talking about investing in people, because the mayor brags about things that she's investing in, right? And I don't really want to get off on the mayor, but if we're thinking about investing in people and making the necessary type of investment, we also have to do away with exclusionary type programs that are called safety measures that are not safety measures. They're just another form of a tax, like red light cameras and speed cameras are scientifically have been determined on 5 different studies that they are not a safety benefit to our roads. Will you do away with that exclusionary program?
So the reason why my budget reflects investments, because that's what safe American cities do. The reason why my budget plan commits to not raising property taxes is because it's a failed policy. And to your point, Mark, because it's been a failure, because there aren't enough working people in the city of Chicago that you can keep taxing and deliver services. Now they use the tricks, these fines, these fees that continue to harm our people. So here's what I'm committed to doing. And I've already said this in my budget plan, Mark. We're going to do a complete diagnostic, an analysis. We're going to comb through the budget and see where there's waste. As we begin to eliminate the waste, and I can see it, we can begin to write these contracts, because I don't know what these contracts are. Mark, I know you've done a lot of work around it, so I can review it and figure out how we can eventually remove ourselves from those type of budgetary schemes that ultimately hurt our people and don't provide us with a return on that particular piece of revenue. So we've already identified just with supervisors and the rank and file workforce that we have a bloated administrative structure where the national averages, whether it's a blue state or a right to work state, tells you that the average is 10-1. If we right size our supervisory positions with the national average 10-1, we could save $150 million, right? I've said it, we got to pull ourselves out of this deficit, and we can do that without raising property taxes, but we have to respond to what people have said they wanted. I mean, look, King Griffin spent, I don't know, $50 million of his own dollars to defeat the progressive income tax. Y'all know that 71% of Chicagoans said yes to that because we were transparent about where the money was going. And that most people would have received a tax break because most folks, especially in our communities, don't make $250,000. Charles Mark, I won't make $250,000, and I'll be the mayor of Chicago.
Well, you said that you wanted it to be an inclusive thing and do by what the people say that they want. More than 75% of the people of Chicago have been polled and said that they don't want photo enforcement of red light cameras and speed cameras. 75%.
And so what I'm saying is, Mark, is that I'm committed to responding to what people want, but there's also a way in which we have to do it. I have to do a full diagnostic because here's the thing. I don't know what that contract says. I don't know how much of our budget is relying upon that particular fee. We have to assess that because, look, if we want good schools, which we do, if we want real economic opportunity, which we do, if we want safer, more reliable transportation, which we do, if we want mental health centers reopened, which, to your point, that's another commitment that I made because the people said that's what they want, that's going to cost us investing in people. And that's how we have a better, stronger, safer Chicago. So it's not that I'm opposed to eliminating it. It's just a matter of I got to get in the seat to analyze it and see how much of our budget is relying upon that so that once it is phased out or removed, based upon what the contract will permit and allow, that the revenue that we're going to need to at least maintain where we are, but to deal with what my budget plan says what I'm committed to doing, which is eliminating the structural deficit, because that's the thing that's killing us, right? We're just in debt while also making $1 billion worth of investments over the course of 4 years. We're going to have to find a fair way in which we distribute the responsibility of investing in our people.
But Brandon,
and that's going to require, yes.
Brandon, I'll take you at your word that you are not going to raise property taxes, but your budget plan, which I have read, says you need $1 billion, to basically do what you need to do. But some people are going to be paying more in taxes. Now, whether they're businesses or individuals, they're going to be paying more in taxes. Can you tell us who's going to be paying more in taxes if you should have your way as mayor?
Yeah, I can tell you who will be paying more taxes if I'm not the mayor.
I want to know if you are the mayor.
But I know, but I just want to say that, Charles, because none of these individuals have put forth a plan. So I'm gonna go through it. Thank you for taking time to read through it, and it's a living, working document. People get to offer critique today before I'm sworn in, before we're trying to pass a budget in October. So here's what it calls for. I want to make sure that you highlight this, Charles.
Okay, well, you tell us, man. You tell us. And I understand it's a living document. Go ahead.
So here's what I'm highlighting. The fact that we eliminate the structural deficit, let's start there. We pull ourselves up out of this hole. I'm committed to doing what no other administration has been committed to doing. And that's what's really dragging down our economy, right? So let me start there. As far as the critical investments, in order to keep our city safe, we have to invest. And what that means is that the savings that we're going to receive, just as a result of right-sizing our administration, that's going to put us in a much better position. As far as the tax is concerned, the corporate head tax, which Rahm Emanuel eliminated. Rahm Emanuel eliminated that. That corporate head tax had been in place for 40 years. No one was complaining about it. He gave it to them. They didn't even ask for it. And here's what the corporate head tax says. Once you get, we'll negotiate this. We're saying that corporations that have more than 50 employees, there's a $1 to $4 tax per head. That's it. We can raise $20 million to go into healthcare.
Okay, let's keep going on the billion. Give us some more.
So,
who else?
Absolutely. And remember that billion is a result of savings and revenue.
Gotcha.
So
but who else is going to pay higher taxes?
So it's not who else. It's what we're getting. Right? So the revenue that we need to have a safe city is why we're not just looking at the corporate head tax, we're looking at the real estate transfer tax. on mansion.
Okay.
Property that's worth more, that's over $1 million.
Okay.
Right?
I don't know. That doesn't make you have a mansion in a lot of places. That's
Well, but
sure,
there's some,
bedroom.
there's some
I'll give you
properties.
that. Fair enough.
There's some properties. Okay, fine. You're talking about properties that
That's
that
fair
are $1
enough.
million.
I'll give you that.
But
So let's just say
I'm more
$1 million.
interested in.
I didn't blame answer, man.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anybody else?
There's not anybody else. Again, I'm not raising taxes on people, not on property.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing that.
What about this
this?
financial transactions tax that was mentioned when I read the document a couple of days ago?
Mm-hmm.
Is that still on the table? Is that something
That's still on the table? Yeah, that's still on the table, Charles. And we've seen that work in other states.
Mm-hmm.
People said that businesses were going to shut down if you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen. We have all these scare tactics. It didn't happen. Just like the financial transaction tax has worked in other places like New York, for instance. Here's the most important thing: the type of Chicago that we all say we want. How do you do that without making investments? The type of vision that is laid out in the plan, in which Mark you shared, and other people that put forth other plans. You got to pay for stuff, y'all. Everybody knows that. And what's wrong with that? Here's why I raised that. What's wrong with that?
Well, there's no question, Brandon.
No. I'm saying just for me. What I'm saying is that I've been in conversations where other people have brought this up about investment and raising the revenue to do it. I represent a town, a village called Oak Park. Oak Park has 3 public libraries that are open to 9 o'clock. They have 2 school districts in their town with 50,000 people. They have their own public health department. They have the blue line. They have the green line. They have business corridors. They have all of this. You know why they have all of that? Because they invest in their people. They got parks and other recreation. Do you know you can sign your kid up in Oak Park for Hulu?
We also read about a commuter tax for people in the suburbs who commute to the city who make above a certain amount would have to pay a new tax under your budget.
So this tells you how committed I am to the city of Chicago.
Okay. I mean, I just want to know the facts. I want to know where this candidate stands, because you have definitely you'll get on that third rail. I mean, and that's courage, my brother. I appreciate that courage, but I read that, and a lot of people who own companies in the city of Chicago are not going to like that.
Well, listen, I think, but I also think that.
Here's the thing, though, Charles. I want to just challenge that a little bit, though.
Okay.
Do you know what companies and businesses? You know what their biggest concern is? The safety.
Thank you.
It's not true.
I feel
they're not bringing up the taxes, y'all. People want to be in Chicago. You all know when we just got to this last census, there are more white people here now.
Mm-hmm.
So this conversation about how unsafe it is, it's real. And keep in mind, there are businesses that still want to be here, and there are people who are still moving here because it's still the city of Chicago. And so if you want a better, stronger, safer Chicago, you do what safe American cities do. You invest in people.
You got
That's
it.
why
Okay.
I put my budget plan out here now. So, Charles, you don't have to wonder where I stand because it's in writing. People get to look at it. They get to respond to it. They're like, yo,
I appreciate that. As a taxpayer, as a Chicago resident, I appreciate that about your candidacy, because you have shown courage, because you're, like I said, you're on that third rail, and you're brave enough, you have enough courage to get on it and talk to us straight. Mark?
Yeah, the thing is about taxes, and I know that people like to use it as a boogeyman type of situation for one reason or the other. I mean, we have to have taxes, we have to have investment in order for our city to work. However, there is taxes being imposed on the same people at a greater rate who can least afford it. And I have to go back to it again, that we are pulling $500 million out of the poorest communities to support a private company that is profiting off of red light cameras and speed cameras in Chicago. Chicago has the largest number of red light cameras in the country. You know why we have them? Because of a corrupt scheme, period. That's why we have the largest number of red light cameras, because of a guy by the name of John Beals and a person who owned the company Redflex, who agreed to make a deal to give them $1,500 for every camera that they got installed in Chicago. And we got 384 of them installed in Chicago. So I'm saying to you again that, yes, I believe we have to expand the tax base in Chicago. And I am in agreement that we should have a transaction tax. We have no transaction tax on any of the trades, and there are billions of trades that are happening, and they're making billions of dollars. And yes, there should be some sort of transaction tax where we can generate hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue and expand the tax base and take it off of the backs of the people who can least afford it.
I have a question I wanted to ask Brandon. The first time I ever saw you, you were with Karen Lewis and Stacey Davis Gates, and I didn't know who you were. I just noticed his brother was with these two women at CTU. You've been involved in the union for a long time, and you guys have that union has evolved into what I believe is the most powerful union in the city of Chicago. How will you govern in light of your history with CTU and your dealings with CTU? How do you separate the two? How are you going to separate your past from what you hope will be your future?
Charles, I'm always grateful for that question, because I believe that I'm living out, to some extent, what our ancestors could only dream of. So, as I mentioned before, my father's a pastor. He was also in the labor movement. And it was Dr. King, it was Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who said that if the labor rights movement and the civil rights movement were to ever collide, what enormous potential it would have. Mm. He said that at the AFSCME convention. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. And then to think about his time here in Chicago, on the West Side, where he described Chicago like no other place he had been. And he said he had been in the Deep South. This is a city that has been governed by one family for almost 50 of the last 60 years, right? And so now the son of a pastor, the son of someone who comes out of the labor movement, could be in a position to run one of the most largest economies in the world. I'm grateful and I'm humble. And to your question, Charles, that is what motivates me. The ability to serve and live out the dreams of our ancestors. And the fact that this office is no longer going to be our grandparents' office. You need someone like me who is connected to the community, who's connected to labor, who is connected to the entrepreneur spirit and businesses that make up our communities, right? And the fact that we're going to have an elected representative school board, now, whether you agree with it or not, CTS school board that will be elected by the people, because that's what people say they want to remember. Mm-hmm. All right, and we worked hard to get that. That now you're going to need a mayor who will be able to work with an elected school board, who will be able to work with unions, because it's not just the Chicago Teachers Union, it's SEIU as well, who's able to work with city council. I have relationships in Springfield. I don't talk about it a lot, you all, but I want to share this. Over 20 years ago, I went to knock on the door of a state senator who won unopposed. And I was angry, I was young, and I was mad because I had just lost my job because the funding had dried up in the not-for-profit world after 9/11. And when I went to go visit him, his name is Senator Don Harmon. He is now the Senate president. In a couple of months, a person who hired me for $10 an hour because I went to go advocate for our people is now going to be calling me mayor of the city of Chicago.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good answer, Commissioner. I understand what you're saying.
Well, let me ask this question, Brandon. In terms of you're saying that you will look at these things. There was this questionnaire that was done by WBEZ that they sent around, and you had to answer these 23 questions, and we answered those 23 questions, and it at the end of that, it told you who you were most aligned with and who you were least aligned with. And I've been being asked the question of who am I voting for? And I said, well, I don't have a candidate. I don't have a definitive candidate. But in that questionnaire, you came out as the person that I was most aligned with. And I said, even before that, last week, that I'm leaning towards Brandon Johnson. I have to lean to him because I met with him. I like what I have heard him say on some cases. I want to get there. I want to get there to that point. But I believe that if we're going to have a safe Chicago, if we're going to have a strong public school sector, and we're going to have an equitable tax basis, we must deal with the socioeconomic conditions that persist on the south and west side of Chicago. We've got 600 acres of land that used to house more than 30,000 jobs that Black folks mostly had on the southeast side of Chicago. And when that dried up, the conditions on the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago got worse, and nobody has addressed that. And I believe that the plan that I gave you is a plan that we can execute and that we can transform the city of Chicago. Now, I want to ask you a regional question. Would you support the development of the South Suburban Airport, which Chicago would greatly benefit from?
So when that was first raised, I was very, very young and new in government and politics. What I was always struck by, why it didn't make sense to people. And maybe I'm missing something, Mark, but the ability to have, an economic driver, particularly in the Southland, where everybody knows more and more Black residents are moving to. Absolutely, we got to figure that out. What I'm always struck by, and this maybe goes back to the early part of our conversation. I appreciate Charles Thomas said, "Why is Black leadership failing?" Like, he just went for it. Like, I appreciate that, man. We miss you on nightly news, but I'm sure you're enjoying your retirement.
Definitely.
What am I struck by is that you have, there's a brother on the west side, man, that's really fighting hard for a trade school on the west side of Chicago. And I know there are dynamics that you have to work through, but can we get to a yes and then work to figure it out, right? And I'm not saying that we go into it raggedy and not have any plans. I'm saying if we want a stronger, safer Chicago, you invest in people. To have we are spending, what was this last influx of cash into O'Hare, this international airport, which, look, we have to do everything to make sure that space is held down.
Oh, the $7 billion that we're getting ready to spend out there?
So what I'm saying is, y'all don't start something tonight, that in the Southland, where if it rains too much, you can't get under a viaduct. Robbins, we don't even talk about it anymore, Charles, but remember Reverend Jackson highlighted the fact that they were drinking poisoned water, maybe right around the same time as Flint, Michigan crisis, right? And where you've seen water has been privatized and the impact that has on poor people. An airport could literally save lives and change an entire region. Now look, I'm not going to claim that I have all the details. I don't even know all the politics. What I'm saying, though, is for the sake of our people, for the sake of a stronger, better, safer Chicago, let's knock this stuff off. Like, what's the worst that can happen? It's got to be better than what we got.
Brandon, I think what Mark is getting at, and you can jump in here anytime you want, Mark, but past mayors, Richard M. Daley and Rahm Emanuel, they did what they needed to do to stop a South Suburban Airport from being built. And they were very effective and they were successful. Would Mayor Brandon Johnson do the same thing to protect O'Hare? Don't support an airport in the south suburbs. Would you be different than either Mayor Daley or Mayor Emanuel. It really wasn't that much of an issue during Lori Lightfoot's term, but it was an issue during the terms of those two other mayors that I mentioned.
Right.
Would you do that? Would you, to protect O'Hare, not support an airport in the south suburbs?
Look, no one has to lose at the expense of someone else winning. And in this situation, again, as I admitted, look, I don't know all the dynamics around this. Look, we know politics of Chicago is an institution in and of itself, right? What I'm saying is I get the benefit of it, and I'm not opposed to it. And as I understand more of the dynamics once I'm sworn in, we can make a better assessment of what we're dealing with. I don't believe that this is about protecting O'Hare. O'Hare in and of itself is an institution. This might be about protecting some of their friends, right? So I don't know that, right? Mm-hmm. What I will say is, though, Charles, come on, man, I'll be different. I'll be the first mayor with a full beard. Come on, brother.
Let me ask you one real quick question. You can do yes or no. Would you support the right of non-U.S. citizens, migrants, undocumented, to vote in city elections?
So I'm still of the mind that pathway to citizenship is the right to full enfranchisement.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. That's going to be full, but in the interim.
So until someone tells me something otherwise, that I believe that in order to vote in the city of Chicago in the municipal election, that the pathway to citizenship gives you the right to vote. Anything short of that, then we are not being governed no longer by the rules that we've established in order to.
So you would oppose having non-U.S. citizens vote in municipal elections, but residents.
Right. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So
okay.
As
gotcha. I hear you.
Pathway to citizenship. You got to get there, right? You get there, then it opens you up to the rights of all citizens of the city of Chicago.
All right, let me say this, Brandon, and we're going to give you the last word to wrap it up because we're getting close to the end of the program. Now, as it relates to the South Suburban Airport, there would be no way, because I'm leaning towards your candidacy, and I'm closer to your candidacy after tonight's conversation. There would be no way that I would have you out there dangling without the information. We have the information. I've been working on this for years. The state of Illinois has acquired 90% of the land. We purchased 90% of the land. The only reason that it is not done is because the decision has not been made and it has not been supported by the last Rahm Emanuel, and it was cut off at the knees by Rahm Emanuel and certainly by Daley. And this is not going to cannibalize Midway or O'Hare. We've lost business opportunity because we don't have the South Suburban Airport, which the FAA has told us 20 some odd years ago that we need another airport. So we won't have you dangling out there in the wind, jumping off a cliff. It's the right thing to do.
Well, look, Mark, you're absolutely right. You have always been thorough. So let's talk. Let me know what I may not know. That's all. And as I said, as it stands, the view that I have that I'm sitting from, and maybe we're sitting from the same view, and maybe I have more of the information than I realize. But from the view that I have, that the Southland and my experiences working with my colleagues who represent the Southland, that an airport could be life-changing. And as it stands, I don't know why anybody would oppose it. And I didn't oppose it when I was just coming up through the politics of watching, Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., make this case. And even in the position that I've been in as an organizer, as a Cook County commissioner, fighting for billions of dollars to go into places like the Southland who have infrastructural damage that's so severe that the people of our county don't have access to clean water. And to your point, Mark, the type of economic generator it would be for the entire region, without even seeking a full like manifestation of a perspective, I got to imagine that this would have an incredible infusion. We're talking hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into a region, and let's sit down and talk. And I would love to be able to go through what you do have, because I do want to make sure that I have a strong case going in, you all. I thank you all for this, but I want to just be a little extra vulnerable. You all know the pressure that a Black man has in this city, in this country to lead. And I'm raised in a Black family. I love my Black wife, and I want to do right by our people. And I believe that we can lift our people up and other people benefit, but I'm also going to need people to have my back.
I want to finally
I'm not
have
going to just turn over an incredible economy like the city of Chicago and just simply wash their hands of it, especially because we're going to distribute it in an equitable way that's going to serve the interests of our people and benefit all people. And I hope that as you lean in my direction, that you support me. Our success means that we got to do it together, and I'm committed to that. Thank you both.
all right.
Thank you.
Brandon
Commissioner
Johnson, mayoral candidate for 2023. He has been here with us on the People Show. Brandon, you and I will talk. I will talk with your people to make sure you have more information. I want to see another mayor that I could be proud of for the entire city of Chicago, and in particular for Black Chicago, transforming.
That's our
BrandonForChicago.com. BrandonForChicago.com. Check it out.
yeah. Read that plan, that budget plan. That's interesting stuff.
All right.
This has been another edition of the People Show on Intellectual Radio. We again will thank Commissioner Brandon Johnson for appearing with us tonight, and again, thank you so much, Mark Wallace. I mean, you work hard on this, man, and I really appreciate your effort. And
thank you.
You're the best, man.
We're a team. Thank you, Earl. And certainly thank the viewers and thank the listeners. And you can go on Intellectual Radio. You'll be able to re-listen to the conversation with Brandon Johnson and Mark Wallace and Charles Thomas. We'll be back next week with another edition of the People Show. And hopefully we will have another mayoral candidate with us next week. We've invited them all.
Good night, all.
Good night.